1850s America. Whale oil is fading. Factories are hungry for fuel. Cities are growing. Darkness still rules the night. And in a small office, a man stares at a strange black liquid floating on water in Pennsylvania. Most people call it useless. Some call it medicine. But one man sees something different. He sees light. He sees power. He sees an empire. His name is George Bissell, and he is about to change the world. Before oil, before derricks, before fortunes. There was a young man growing up in early 19th century America, a country still defining itself. George Bissell was born in 1821 in Connecticut. This was not the America of railroads stretching across the continent. It was a young republic, rough, expanding, hungry. From an early age, Bissell stood out, not because he was loud or powerful, but because he observed. He studied. He questioned. He attended Dartmouth College, one of the most respected institutions of the time. Education in the 1840s was not common. It was a privilege. But for Bissell, education was not just about status. It was about curiosity. He trained as a lawyer. Lawyers in that era were often more than legal minds. They were strategists, negotiators, architects of commerce. And America was entering a period of explosive growth. Railroads were expanding. Cities were swelling. Factories were multiplying. Industry was awakening. But industry had a weakness. Light. After sunset, America dimmed. Homes and streets relied heavily on whale oil lamps. The whaling industry, especially from New England, had built massive fleets hunting whales across the globe. Whale oil was valuable, liquid gold of its time. But there was a problem. Whales were becoming scarce. Voyages were longer. Costs were higher. Prices were rising. Lighting was becoming expensive and unstable. And America was growing too fast to depend on the oceans forever. This is where Bissell's mind worked differently. Most people accepted things as they were. Bissell asked, what replaces this? He wasn't looking for oil yet. He was looking for the next big shift. That's what separated him from others. He was not chasing wealth. He was searching for opportunity hidden inside change. By the early 1850s, Bissell had moved into business ventures. He was not yet wealthy, not powerful, not famous, but he had something more dangerous: vision. And that vision was about to collide with something strange coming out of the ground in Pennsylvania. In western Pennsylvania, near a quiet town called Titusville, something unusual had been happening for generations. A dark, sticky substance seeped naturally from the earth. It floated on water. Farmers noticed it collecting on creeks. Native Americans had used it for medicinal purposes long before European settlers arrived. Locals called it rock oil. To most people, it was a curiosity. To traveling salesmen, it was bottled and sold as medicine, a miracle cure for aches, pains, and arthritis. But no one, absolutely no one, believed it could power a nation. Then one day, in the early 1850s, George Bissell saw a bottle of this Pennsylvania rock oil in the office of a Dartmouth professor. The bottle was small, unimpressive, almost ordinary. But what Bissell saw inside, it was not medicine. It was potential energy. He began asking questions. What exactly was this substance? Could it burn? Could it be refined? Could it replace whale oil? At this time, chemistry was advancing. Distillation processes were becoming more sophisticated. Coal oil, kerosene derived from coal, was already being experimented with as a cheaper lighting alternative. If coal could produce lamp fuel, why not rock oil? But there was a major obstacle. The oil only appeared in tiny surface seepages. It wasn't abundant on the surface, which meant one thing. If this was going to become something big, it would have to be extracted from below ground. That idea was radical. Oil was not something people drilled for. Salt? Yes. Water? Yes. Oil? That sounded absurd. Most believed oil was just random pockets near the surface. But Bissell studied geological reports. He noticed that oil seepage often appeared in specific regions, predictable regions. That suggested structure. And if there was structure, there might be underground reservoirs. That thought changed everything. Bissell wasn't guessing. He was thinking like a modern energy entrepreneur decades before the term existed. He began gathering investors. He faced skepticism immediately. People laughed. Drill for oil? What? It was risky, expensive, unproven. But Bissell understood something profound. If this worked, it wouldn't just be a new product. It would be a new industry, an entirely new energy source for a rapidly industrializing nation. He partnered with investors and formed what would become the Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company, one of the first companies ever created specifically to explore oil as a commercial resource. At this moment, there were no oil tycoons, no refineries dominating markets, no pipelines stretching across states, just a bottle of dark liquid, and one man willing to believe it was more than medicine. What George Bissell saw was not oil. He saw light in every home. He saw factories running longer hours. He saw cities glowing at night. He saw the beginning of something the world had never experienced before, the petroleum age. And soon, he would risk everything to prove he was right. By the mid-1850s, George Bissell had something dangerous in his possession. Not oil, an idea. And ideas are fragile before they become inevitable. He had studied the Pennsylvania rock oil. He had consulted chemists. Tests confirmed something revolutionary. When refined, this strange black liquid could produce a clean-burning fuel superior to many existing alternatives. Kerosene from coal was already entering the market, but coal extraction was labor-intensive and expensive. Rock oil, if obtained in large quantities, could be cheaper, more scalable, more powerful. There was just one problem. No one knew how to get enough of it. Up until this point, oil was skimmed from surface seepages. Barrels were filled by scraping oil that naturally floated on water. It was slow, unreliable, and limited. Bissell's competitors thought small. Bissell thought vertically. If oil seeped upward, then it must be coming from somewhere, from beneath the earth. That conclusion seems obvious today. But in the 1850s, geology was still developing. Petroleum reservoirs were not a proven concept. Many believed oil simply existed in scattered underground pockets, accidental, random, unpredictable. Drilling for oil sounded like drilling for luck. Investors hated luck. They wanted certainty. When Bissell presented the idea of drilling deep into the ground, using salt well drilling technology, reactions ranged from polite skepticism to open laughter. Oil isn't coal, some argued. It doesn't sit in veins. You'll spend thousands chasing mud. Money began tightening. Even within the newly formed Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company, doubts started creeping in. Bissell had helped transform the small venture into what would become the Seneca Oil Company, attracting more structured investment. But structure also meant scrutiny. Board members wanted progress. They wanted returns. And so far, there was only theory. Drilling would be expensive. Equipment had to be transported to remote Titusville. Labor hired, timber secured, machinery constructed, all for something that had never been done before. This wasn't innovation. This was gamble disguised as science. But Bissell was not acting blindly. He had commissioned a scientific report from Professor Benjamin Silliman Jr. of Yale. The findings were clear. Petroleum could be refined into valuable products, including illuminating oil. That report became his weapon. With science behind him, Bissell pushed forward. Still, investors hesitated. And then came the hardest decision of all. Who would actually drill the well? Experienced oil drillers did not exist. So Bissell turned to someone unexpected, a former railroad conductor with military bearing and stubborn persistence. Edwin Drake. Drake was not a geologist, not an engineer, not an oil expert, but he had discipline. And more importantly, he was willing. Drake was sent to Titusville in 1858 with limited funds and unlimited skepticism following him. Locals mocked the effort. They called it Drake's Folly. Children laughed at the strange wooden derrick rising above the quiet Pennsylvania land. Supplies broke. Drilling equipment malfunctioned. Money ran dangerously low. Letters were sent back to the company asking for more funds. Each request tested the patience of investors already unsure about the entire venture. Behind the scenes, Bissell fought to keep confidence alive. He reassured backers. He defended the science. He argued that great industries are never born safely. But time was not on his side. Every dry foot drilled downward felt like another argument against him. Every broken tool felt like public humiliation. This wasn't just financial risk anymore. It was reputational. If this failed, Bissell wouldn't just lose money. He would become a man who tried to drill for oil and failed. But sometimes history balances on persistence. By the summer of 1859, the well had reached nearly 70 feet. Not deep by modern standards, but exhausting for the crude equipment of the time. Progress slowed. Funds nearly disappeared. Some investors quietly prepared to abandon the project. Then, on August 27, 1859, everything changed. Drake's drill struck a pocket. The next morning, oil rose up the pipe. Not seeped, not scraped. Rose, flowing steadily from the earth. In that moment, the gamble ended, and an industry was born. The risk no one believed in had become the foundation of modern civilization. And George Bissell, though not physically standing at the well that morning, had proven something extraordinary. Vision is often ridiculed before it becomes obvious. Summer 1859. Titusville, Pennsylvania was not a place where history was expected to happen. It was quiet, modest, surrounded by forests and muddy roads. The kind of town where nothing dramatic ever seemed to occur. And yet, beneath its soil, the future of industrial civilization waited. For months, Edwin Drake had been drilling. The wooden derrick stood awkwardly against the sky. Strange, almost embarrassing. Locals gathered just to watch the experiment. Not with hope, with amusement. They called it Drake's Folly. Because what kind of man drills for oil? Coal is mined. Salt is drilled. But oil? Oil was something that simply appeared or didn't. Behind the scenes, George Bissell felt the pressure tightening like a noose. Investors were restless. Money was nearly gone. Equipment had failed repeatedly. Drilling in 1859 was not precise engineering. It was slow, brutal labor. Tools jammed. Shafts collapsed. Progress measured in inches. And yet Drake kept going. One innovation made the difference. A simple but critical solution. Drake drove an iron pipe down into the ground to prevent the well walls from collapsing as drilling continued. It was basic by modern standards, revolutionary at the time. Without that pipe, the well would have failed. History often turns on details no one notices in the moment. By late August, the drill had reached approximately 69 feet. Not hundreds, not thousands, 69. Then on August 27th, the drill bit dropped suddenly into a crevice. Work stopped for the evening. There was no explosion, no dramatic geyser, just uncertainty. The next morning, August 28th, 1859, Drake's driller returned to inspect the well. And there it was, oil, floating inside the pipe, rising slowly to the surface. Black, thick, silent. They began pumping. Barrel after barrel filled. The earth was no longer seeping oil. It was producing it. For the first time in human history, oil had been deliberately extracted from underground in a controlled, commercial way. It is difficult to overstate what that meant. This was not just a successful well. It was proof. Proof that oil existed in reservoirs. Proof that drilling worked. Proof that petroleum could be an industry. Within days, the news spread. Within weeks, speculation exploded. Within months, Titusville transformed into chaos. Farmers abandoned fields to lease land. Carpenters became drillers. Lawyers became speculators. Wooden derricks multiplied across the Pennsylvania landscape like a forest of ambition. The quiet town became the epicenter of what historians would later call the Pennsylvania Oil Rush. Barrels piled high. Railroads strained under demand. Fortunes were made overnight. Some were lost just as quickly. The price of oil fluctuated wildly, from incredible highs to devastating crashes. But none of that mattered. The age of petroleum had begun. And somewhere away from the well site, George Bissell understood the magnitude of what had just happened. He had believed oil could replace whale oil. Now it was undeniable. Kerosene refined from petroleum burned cleaner and brighter. It was cheaper, more scalable, more reliable. The whaling industry, once dominant, would never be the same again. Cities could now light streets more affordably. Factories could extend working hours. Industrial expansion accelerated. The world did not yet realize it, but this single well at 69 feet would eventually lead to internal combustion engines, automobiles, airplanes, global energy markets, geopolitical power struggles, and the rise of empires, companies that would shape the modern world, including Standard Oil, founded later by John D. Rockefeller, all trace their origin back to that modest wooden derrick in Titusville. But here is the quiet irony. Drake became famous as the man who struck oil. Rockefeller would become legendary as the man who controlled it. Yet the original spark, the belief that oil was worth drilling for, belonged to George Bissell. Without his conviction, there would have been no well, no boom, no industry. History remembers explosions, but revolutions often begin with something quieter. A man, an idea, and the courage to drill where no one else dared. The oil did not just flow from the well in Titusville. It ignited something far more powerful: greed, opportunity, madness. After the success of Edwin Drake's well in 1859, news traveled at astonishing speed for its time. Newspapers reported it. Word of mouth carried it. Speculators packed their belongings and rushed to Pennsylvania. Titusville transformed almost overnight. What had once been a quiet rural region became a roaring frontier town. Land that had been nearly worthless suddenly became priceless. Farmers who once struggled to sell crops now leased land for drilling rights. Wooden derricks rose everywhere. Hundreds, then thousands. The countryside looked like a forest of machines. Every man with a little savings wanted a well. Every investor wanted a share. Oil prices skyrocketed. At one point, crude oil sold for nearly $20 a barrel, an enormous amount in the 1860s. Fortunes were made in weeks. Stories spread of ordinary laborers becoming wealthy overnight. But the boom had a darker side. There was no regulation, no coordination, no infrastructure strong enough to support the explosion of supply. When too many wells struck oil at once, prices collapsed. From $20 per barrel, oil sometimes crashed to less than $1. Men who felt rich in the morning were bankrupt by winter. Boom towns became ghost towns just as quickly. Speculation replaced strategy. And in the middle of this chaos stood the original visionary, George Bissell. Bissell had proven oil could be drilled, but he was not built for disorder. He had imagined industry. What he witnessed was frenzy. The early oil business was brutal. Wells caught fire. Storage tanks exploded. Rivers were polluted. Refineries operated with little safety standards. Competition was ruthless. Theft was common. Contracts were broken. It was capitalism in its rawest, most violent form. And yet, something bigger was happening beneath the chaos. Kerosene production increased rapidly. Whale oil prices plummeted. The whaling industry, once dominant in New England, began its slow decline. Cities grew brighter at night. Factories operated longer hours. Oil was no longer a curiosity. It was becoming essential. The Pennsylvania oil rush did not just create wealth. It created proof that petroleum could power modern life. But as production increased wildly, a new problem emerged. Too much oil, too many small producers, too much instability. The industry needed order, and that order would soon come, not from the dreamers who started it, but from strategists who saw opportunity in chaos. As the oil boom roared through the 1860s, a young businessman in Cleveland was watching carefully. His name was John D. Rockefeller. Unlike Bissell, Rockefeller did not discover oil. Unlike Drake, he did not drill it. He refined it, and that difference would change everything. While Pennsylvania was consumed with drilling wells and striking oil, Rockefeller saw where the real power would lie. Not in production, but in control. Control of refining. Control of transportation. Control of pricing. By 1870, he founded Standard Oil. Rockefeller believed chaos was inefficient. He negotiated secret deals with railroads. He undercut competitors. He bought failing refineries. He consolidated the fragmented industry into a single, organized machine. Within a decade, Standard Oil controlled the majority of oil refining in the United States. The wild boomtown disorder that followed Drake's wealth slowly became structured monopoly power. And here lies the irony. George Bissell had imagined oil as an industry, but he did not build the empire. He was the spark. Rockefeller became the flame. Bissell profited, yes. He invested. He remained involved. But he did not accumulate the staggering wealth that later oil barons achieved. Why? Because vision and domination are different skills. Bissell was a pioneer. Rockefeller was a system builder. History tends to remember the wealthiest man in the room. But without the man who first believed oil could be drilled, without Bissell's stubborn insistence against ridicule and doubt, there would have been no industry to dominate. No Standard Oil, no oil magnates, no global petroleum economy. The modern world, automobiles, airplanes, plastics, global trade, all trace their lineage back to a radical thought in the 1850s. What if we drill for oil? And that thought belonged to George Bissell. He did not control the empire, but he opened the door to it. And sometimes, the person who opens the door changes history just as much as the one who walks through it. History has a strange habit. It remembers the empires. It remembers the billionaires. It remembers the monopolies. But it often forgets the first believer. When people speak about oil, they speak about John D. Rockefeller and the dominance of Standard Oil. They speak about pipelines stretching across continents, about oil barons and global power, about wars influenced by petroleum, about automobiles, aviation, plastics, skyscrapers. They speak about the modern world, but they rarely speak about George Bissell. And yet, without him, the story never begins. He did not strike the oil himself. That was Edwin Drake. He did not dominate the market. He did not become the richest man in America. What he did was something quieter and in many ways harder. He believed before proof existed. In the 1850s, oil was medicine in a bottle, a curiosity on a creek, a nuisance in the soil. Bissell looked at that black liquid and saw light in every American home. He saw cities illuminated after dark. He saw factories running longer. He saw energy independent from the ocean's whales. He saw an industry where none existed. That is the burden of vision. You see the future, and you must convince others it is real. He faced ridicule. He faced investor doubt. He faced the possibility of becoming a historical footnote labeled Drake's Folly. But he persisted, and when oil rose from 69 feet beneath Titusville soil in 1859, it did more than fill barrels. It unlocked the industrial age's next chapter. From that well would come the kerosene lamp replacing whale oil, the internal combustion engine decades later, the automobile revolution of Henry Ford, the aviation breakthroughs of the Wright brothers, the global energy networks that define geopolitics today. One idea, one risk, one decision to drill. George Bissell did not control the oil empire, but he made the empire possible. And maybe that is the deeper truth of history. The world is not only changed by those who accumulate the most wealth. It is changed by those who dare to imagine what others dismiss. Some men build towers. Some men build systems. And some men simply dig the first hole in the ground. And that hole changes everything. Like the video, subscribe for more stories, and share it if it inspired you.